If the title of this video made you roll your eyes, thinking this is going to be some wild conspiracy theory about secret government backdoors, stick around, because what we're actually covering today is a real, formally published, unclassified document straight from the National Security Agency itself, one that lays out specific phone settings almost every single American leaves, switched on by default, settings the NSA has repeatedly, publicly urged people to disable. This isn't speculation. This isn't a leaked document or an anonymous source. This is the NSA's own official mobile device best practices guide, publicly available, and in this video we're walking through exactly what it says, why it matters, and exactly which settings you need to check on your own phone right now, why the NSA is even talking about this. Let's start with why an agency best known for signals intelligence and cybersecurity operations is publishing consumer-facing advice about your personal smartphone in the first place. The NSA has been direct about its reasoning here, stating plainly that threats to mobile devices are more prevalent and increasing in scope and complexity, and specifically warning that many of the convenience features built into modern smartphones provide real convenience and capability, but sacrifice security in the process. That's a genuinely important framing to sit with for a second, because it reframes this entire conversation. This isn't about some flaw hackers discovered, it's about default settings that were designed from the start to prioritize convenience over security, and most manufacturers never expect the average user to go back and reconsider that trade-off once it's already been made for them out of the box. The setting almost nobody touches. So let's get to the specific setting driving the headline you clicked on, the one buried in your phone's quick settings panel that you've probably never once thought to turn off unless you were actively connecting to a specific device. The NSA published formal guidance on securing wireless devices in public settings, and its minimum recommendation is refreshingly blunt. Disable Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC when you're not actively using them. That guidance was originally aimed specifically at teleworkers and travelers connecting to public networks, but its actual scope covers any consumer smartphone, meaning this isn't advice reserved purely for government employees or people working sensitive jobs. It applies to you, sitting at home, scrolling social media, exactly as much as it applies to a federal employee traveling abroad. A separate NSA release specifically focused on limiting location data exposure tied those same 3 radios, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC, together with GPS specifically, explaining how a phone can continuously reveal its owner's precise physical position even when the relevant apps are completely closed and not actively running in the foreground. Together, these 2 documents form the agency's clearest public case that always-on wireless defaults create a persistent, ongoing security gap that most people are walking around with every single day without ever realizing it. Why this isn't just one agency's opinion. Here's what genuinely elevates this specific recommendation beyond a single agency's personal preference, and it's worth understanding just how consistently this exact advice shows up across completely separate organizations. Federal civilian agencies echo this exact same recommendation independently. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, widely known as CISA, states directly in its own Bluetooth explainer that the best practice is specifically to disable Bluetooth when you're not actively using it. And CISA separately maintains its own consumer-focused mobile device checklist that treats turning off unused radios as a standard, expected hardening step for everyday users. The Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate published a legally mandated mobile device security study that specifically catalogs threat categories tied directly to wireless interfaces built into consumer phones. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, commonly known as NIST, separately addressed this exact same underlying risk surface in its own mobile device security guidance, specifically covering bring your own device work environments, reinforcing the same practical reasoning behind disabling exposure-increasing default settings. And outside the United States entirely, the United Kingdom's National Cybersecurity Center states plainly that for short-range wireless interfaces, such as Bluetooth, if the connection isn't currently required, the correct move is simply to disable it. The consistency here across multiple completely independent government bodies, spanning different countries entirely, is genuinely notable, because no government agency with any actual expertise in this space is telling people the opposite. The specific threats this actually prevents. So what exactly are Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC exposing you to when left running constantly in the background? Each of these wireless radios continuously broadcasts signals, actively searching for networks or devices to connect to, and that constant broadcasting creates multiple distinct attack surfaces. Bluetooth connections have historically been exploited through techniques that allow nearby attackers to intercept data, track a device's precise location, or in more serious cases, gain some level of unauthorized access to the device itself, particularly on devices running outdated software. Open Wi-Fi scanning constantly reveals a unique identifier tied to your specific device to any nearby receiver capable of picking it up, an identifier that can potentially be used to track your movements across different locations over time, effectively creating a detailed picture of everywhere you've physically been, purely from your phone quietly searching for networks in the background. NFC, the short-range technology powering tap-to-pay features, creates its own narrower but still real exposure window specifically during the moments it's actively enabled in broadcasting. None of this requires you to be a specific, deliberately targeted individual for these vulnerabilities to matter. These are structural weaknesses in how always-on wireless connectivity fundamentally works, present on every single device running with these features left active by default. The location trail you're leaving constantly. Building directly on that same wireless exposure issue, let's talk specifically about location services, because this is genuinely one of the most invasive default settings running quietly on virtually every modern smartphone. The NSA's guidance specifically recommends that users disable location services entirely when they're not actually needed for a specific task in that moment. This goes considerably further than simply worrying about a single app tracking your location while you're actively using it. GPS, combined with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth scanning working together, allows your phone to continuously determine and log your precise location, frequently even when the specific apps you'd expect to be using, that data are completely closed and not running in the foreground at all. Think about the practical implications of that for a moment. Your phone can potentially be building an incredibly detailed, continuous record of everywhere you go throughout your entire day, every store you walk into, every route you take to work, every location where you spend meaningful amounts of time, all happening quietly in the background, regardless of whether you've deliberately opened a Maps app or a fitness tracker at that specific moment. The weekly habit that genuinely helps. Beyond individual settings you can toggle once and forget about, the NSA's guidance includes one specific ongoing habit that's received considerable attention, precisely because it sounds almost comically simple for something coming from one of the world's most sophisticated intelligence agencies. Turn your phone completely off and then back on again, at least once every week. Okay, this isn't the same thing as simply locking your screen or letting your phone go into standby mode. The NSA specifically means a full, complete power cycle, powering the device entirely off and then rebooting it from scratch. Here's the actual technical reasoning behind this specific recommendation, and it genuinely makes sense once you understand it. A weekly reboot breaks the memory state where certain sophisticated types of spyware specifically reside, since many malicious payloads used in advanced attacks don't actually survive a complete power cycle, which makes a simple reboot a remarkably quick and effective tool for clearing them from your device entirely. In this specific context, a restart functions almost like a security sweep, one that can prevent certain surveillance tools from lingering undetected on your device indefinitely. It's worth being honest about the real limitations here, though, because the NSA itself is upfront about them. This particular piece of advice is explicitly not a silver bullet capable of solving every possible security threat. And while it's genuinely good general advice worth following, turning your device off and back on again will not meaningfully help you against many of the more advanced malware and spyware threats that are specifically programmed to reload themselves automatically after a reboot occurs. The document itself includes a chart specifically illustrating exactly how effective each individual tactic actually is against different categories of threats, rather than presenting any single tip as a complete, comprehensive solution on its own. There's no strict universal rule dictating exactly when you need to perform this weekly restart, but the NSA specifically recommends doing it at minimum once per week. And you could genuinely align it with some existing routine task you already do regularly, a Sunday night habit, for instance. Control matters more than people assume. The NSA's guidance also emphasizes something that sounds almost too obvious to mention, right up until you actually think carefully about how often it gets casually violated in daily life. Maintain physical control of your phone at all times. This specific piece of advice becomes considerably more detailed and pointed in the NSA's separate guidance, specifically covering travel outside the continental United States, where it explicitly states you should never leave a device in a hotel room safe, and separately advises users to physically cover all cameras with opaque tape and disable them in device settings whenever realistically possible. That travel-specific guidance also directly warns that foreign countries can, and sometimes do, leverage their own security apparatus, particularly at airport security checkpoints and custom stations, along with connections tied to local tourism industries in ways specifically relevant to mobile device security for travelers passing through. The app ecosystem rules. Worth following, shifting specifically to how you actually manage the applications installed on your phone. The NSA's guidance offers some genuinely straightforward practical advice here as well. You should install a genuinely minimal number of apps overall and download them only from official, legitimate app stores specifically, the App Store for iPhone devices and the Google Play Store for Android devices, rather than sideloading apps from unofficial, unverified, third-party sources. You should also make a habit of closing apps entirely when you're not actively using them, rather than simply leaving dozens of applications running continuously in the background indefinitely. Whenever you receive a software update for either your operating system or any individual app installed on your device, install that specific update as soon as realistically possible, since these updates frequently patch known security vulnerabilities that attackers are actively aware of and actively attempting to exploit in the wild. The modifications you should never make. Here's a specific piece of guidance genuinely worth flagging directly, Funk. Or anyone who's ever been curious about customizing their phone beyond what the manufacturer originally intended, the NSA specifically advises against jailbreaking your iPhone or rooting your Android device. Both of these processes, despite offering genuinely appealing additional customization options and expanded control over your device's software, work specifically by deliberately removing built-in security restrictions that the manufacturer originally put in place. Once those specific protections have been removed from a device, a wide range of security features designed to contain and limit the damage from a successful attack simply stop functioning as intended, meaningfully increasing your overall risk. Profile in exchange for customization options, most users genuinely don't need for their everyday, practical use of the device. Sensitive information and links deserve extra caution. The guidance also directly addresses how you should be communicating sensitive information through your phone specifically. Do not use your device to text sensitive information, since standard text messaging generally lacks the kind of robust encryption protections found in more secure, purpose-built messaging applications. And never open unknown email attachments or click unfamiliar links, even ones that appear to come specifically from contacts you already know and trust, since compromised accounts belonging to people you know are frequently used specifically to distribute malicious links and attachments through exactly that established, trusted relationship. This specific piece of advice directly ties back to broader phishing awareness more generally. Avoid tapping links found inside messages, even ones apparently sent from trusted contacts, since a contact's own account may have already been compromised without either of you realizing it yet. The charging cable. You shouldn't trust blindly. Here's a specific detail that genuinely surprises a lot of people once they first hear about it, precisely because it involves something as mundane and routine as simply charging your phone. You should only use original charging cables and accessories specifically sourced from a trusted manufacturer. And you should actively stay away from using public charging stations, the kind commonly found in airports, shopping malls, and coffee shops. This particular threat has its own name within cybersecurity circles, specifically commonly called juice jacking, referring to the practice of maliciously modified charging cables or public charging ports being used specifically to install malware or extract data directly from a connected device while it's charging, entirely without the phone's owner realizing anything unusual is actually happening during that seemingly innocent charging session. Pop-ups deserve more suspicion than people give them. The NSA's guidance also specifically addresses unexpected pop-up notifications appearing on your device, noting directly that unexpected pop-ups can genuinely be malicious in nature. If you receive one, the recommended response is to force close all of your currently open applications entirely by swiping them away, rather than directly interacting with the specific pop-up itself by tapping any button it presents to you, since even a button labeled something reassuring like close or cancel can sometimes trigger unintended malicious actions, depending specifically on how that particular pop-up has actually been maliciously constructed and coded. How to actually check your phone right now. So let's turn directly to the specific practical steps you can take on your own phone right now, this exact moment, to bring it genuinely in line with everything the NSA is specifically recommending here. On iPhone, swipe down from the top right corner to access Control Center, and tap both the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth icons to disable them whenever you're genuinely not actively using a connected device or network. To fully disable Wi-Fi and Bluetooth at the deeper system level, rather than just the quick temporary Control Center, toggle, go into Settings, then Wi-Fi and Settings, then Bluetooth specifically, switching each one off directly from within its own dedicated settings menu. For location services specifically, go into Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Location Services, where you can review exactly which individual apps currently have location access, and adjust each one individually to while using the app rather than always, or disable location services entirely for apps that genuinely don't need it functioning at all for their core purpose. On Android, the exact navigation path can vary slightly depending on your specific phone's manufacturer, but broadly, swipe down from the top of your screen to access your quick settings panel, where you'll find dedicated toggles specifically for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC, letting you disable each one directly whenever they're genuinely not actively in use for a specific task. For a deeper, more thorough review, go into Settings, then Location, to review and adjust exactly which apps currently have ongoing location access and to what specific degree of precision and frequency. To review and clean up your saved Wi-Fi network specifically, go into Settings, then Wi-Fi, then tap into your saved networks list, and manually delete any specific networks you genuinely no longer actively use in your day-to-day life. And for that weekly reboot habit specifically, simply hold down your phone's power button until the restart option appears on screen, then select it, rather than only ever powering the device down when a mandatory software update specifically forces you to do so. Why convenience over security is the actual core lesson. Here, stepping back from the individual, specific settings for a moment, it's genuinely worth understanding the broader underlying theme running consistently throughout the NSA's entire guidance document, because it's honestly the single most useful mental framework to carry forward well beyond this specific list of individual tips. Every single one of these default settings, always on Bluetooth, always on Wi-Fi scanning, continuous location tracking running in the background, was specifically designed by device manufacturers to prioritize seamless, effortless convenience above all else. Your phone automatically connecting to your car's Bluetooth system the moment you get in, your phone automatically joining your home Wi-Fi network the second you walk through your front door, your phone automatically suggesting nearby restaurants based on continuously tracked location data. These are all genuinely convenient, pleasant features that most people have come to expect and rely on constantly without a second thought. But convenience and security exist directly in tension with one another far more often than most people realize or actively consider. And manufacturers, quite reasonably from a pure product design and user experience standpoint, generally default toward maximizing convenience rather than maximizing security, on the reasonable assumption that most everyday users would rather have things simply work automatically and seamlessly than have to manually approve every single connection or location request individually every single time it occurs. The NSA's guidance essentially represents the opposite end of that same underlying spectrum, a set of recommendations built specifically for people who are deliberately willing to sacrifice a genuine, real degree of convenience in exchange for meaningfully, measurably reduced risk, who actually needs to follow all of this strictly. It's genuinely worth being honest and balanced here about exactly who benefits most from following every single one of these specific recommendations to the absolute letter, because not every single piece of this advice carries identical weight or urgency for every single person watching this video. If you work specifically in government, journalism, activism, or any other field where you're realistically a plausible individual target for sophisticated, well-resourced attackers, following essentially all of this advice rigorously and consistently is genuinely, seriously worth the corresponding convenience trade-off involved. If you're simply an everyday person going about ordinary daily life, the single highest value, lowest effort changes you can realistically make are disabling Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, specifically when you're genuinely not actively using them, reviewing which apps currently have ongoing location access and meaningfully trimming that list down, and building that simple, low-effort weekly reboot habit into your normal existing routine. None of this requires you to abandon useful smart features entirely or live your daily life in a constant low-grade state of anxiety about your phone. It simply requires you to become genuinely more intentional about when specific features are actually turned on and actively broadcasting, rather than simply leaving absolutely everything switched on constantly by default, indefinitely, purely out of sheer habit and inertia. A fair word about the source itself. It's also worth briefly addressing something a fair number of people watching this video are probably already thinking, given that this specific advice happens to be coming directly from the National Security Agency itself, an organization that has, historically, faced its own well-documented and legitimate scrutiny regarding surveillance practices and capabilities. That's a genuinely fair, reasonable thing to keep firmly in mind here, and it doesn't inherently make this specific guidance wrong or invalid on its own technical merits. The specific security recommendations laid out in this document are grounded in well-established, independently verifiable technical principles regarding how wireless radios, location tracking, and malware persistence actually function at a fundamental level, principles that hold true regardless of which particular organization happens to be the one publishing and packaging that specific advice for public consumption. And as we've walked through in detail throughout this video, this exact same underlying advice is independently, consistently echoed by CISA, DHS, NIST, and the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, organizations with genuinely different individual mandates, different specific areas of institutional focus, and different national governments overseeing them entirely, all arriving independently at essentially the exact same practical conclusions regarding basic mobile device security hygiene, putting the complete checklist together. So bringing every single piece of everything we've walked through together into one clear, complete, practical action plan you can genuinely work through today. Disable Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC specifically whenever you're not actively using them for a specific task in that moment, rather than simply leaving all three switched on permanently by pure default habit. Disable location services for any specific apps that don't genuinely need continuous access to function properly for their actual core purpose, and set the remaining necessary apps specifically to while using the app, rather than always, wherever that particular option is realistically available to you. Build a genuine weekly habit of completely powering your phone entirely off and back on again, rather than only ever doing so when a mandatory software update